So what helps human beings become better people and the world a better place? Well, when they live for something bigger than themselves. Now, everybody who talks about life fulfillment and about happiness on a personal level always iterates this principle. Whether they believe in God or not, whether they're conservative or liberal, across the board, everybody agrees. If you want to Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. Today, who's right? And does anybody actually know? Well, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a podcast designed to help coach you up in your faith. I believe today people are in need of coaching more than anything else. You don't need to be told what to do. You don't need to be scolded. Certainly, using guilt to motivate people has proven to be one of the most ineffective ways to help people in their journey of this thing called life, let alone in their faith. The church in America is struggling, I think, today to teach people the pure essence of the word. Most places today tend to focus on their systematic theology, their denominational doctrine, and trying to get you to buy into that instead of just saying, here is the pure essence of the word, decide for yourself. Because in the end, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about the Bible. What matters is what you think, because it's the way in which the Holy Spirit is going to grow and mature you in your faith. No person can do the work for you. You have to do it yourself. And so that's what the Salty Pastor Podcast is all about. It's a podcast that believes in what Jesus wants to do in you. I have an incredible belief in the power of Jesus Christ working in your life. And so I want you to know that and to experience it in your everyday relationships, in your everyday sense of who you are as a person, in your everyday self-perception and own value, in your confidence and your courage, and how to navigate this world. And the gospel is all about Jesus and his invitation to you to join his kingdom. It's not an earthly kingdom by any means, but it's a kingdom that belongs to Jesus Christ. However, it has a massive impact on all other earthly kingdoms. And once you understand his kingdom and how it impacts other kingdoms and how you live in his kingdom and it flows through you to impact the world in which you live, everything in your life changes. I mean, unequivocally, everything in your life changes. So, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, because right here, fluff is not enough. We want you to know what you believe and why you believe it. And we want you to understand how you can read the Bible and how you can do the work to grow your own faith. And when you do your work, man, it is awesome. So, today, we're going to kick off with a bang, apply what we learned on Tuesday by watching 2 videos, okay? Each one's about 30 seconds long. One from a gal talking about what men are supposed to be like, and then another one from a man who's raising 2 boys. Let's listen to their perspective.
Gen X boys were raised in a world where vulnerability was seen as a weakness. It was like you were all enrolled in this unspoken class called How to Be a Man. And let me tell you, the syllabus was pretty clear. Emotions were forbidden, and real men solved problems with their fists. Anger was the only acceptable emotion for boys. Crying, even if it wasn't anger, wasn't even an option. You learn to man up, put on a brave face, and hide your fears and insecurities. But if we fast forward to adulthood and suddenly you're thrown into this world where you're expected to communicate in relationships, good luck with that. What does that even mean? You spent years learning how to be emotional walls. And then when you entered adulthood, someone handed you a sledgehammer and said, okay, boys, now break down that wall and tell me how you feel.
I will 100% teach my son beat the shit out of kids who make fun of you. Words do not solve problems. Bullies are not going to stop unless you punch them in the mouth. And anybody who says, use your words and have a conversation has never been bullied. Words do not solve it. If anything, they're just going to call you gay or call you soft or make fun of you more because you want to have a soft conversation. Just punch them in the face and move on with your life.
Well, there you go. This lady believes that boys are improperly taught in how to be adult men. And the underlying premise of her position is that men should be embracing their emotions, letting their emotions dictate their behavior, and so that they can have better relationships. On the other hand, this man is saying, look, you live in a world filled with bullies and injustice, and if you want to try to have an emotional or a conversation that's soft to solve your problems, you're always going to be taken advantage of. So punch them in the face and move on with your life. So who's right? Well, that's really the question, because both of these are dramatically different ideas on what a man should be. Now, in order to answer this question, right, we got to think clearly so that we come to good conclusions. And in order to do that, we must understand the underlying question that we are asking. We're asking the question is, well, what is a man? How do males function? And how is that different than females? Now, what we want to do is we have to realize that there are massive ideologies that define what a man is and how he's supposed to act and how he thinks and how he processes emotions and what kind of duties and obligations he has to himself, to his family, and to the world around him. Now, in order to understand these ideologies properly, I think it's very important to have a context, right? A frame of reference. And here's where we're going to start, okay? Let's start in a way that everybody agrees. Something that everybody pretty much says, okay, unless you're a homicidal maniac. And it's basically this. One of the most common things that you hear across the board is that we need to make the world a better place. Well, unless you're a homicidal maniac, everybody pretty much agrees with that. You know what? It's good to make the world a better place. We often hear this notion, we need to become better humans. Man, let's just be better humans. Come on, human beings, do better. What's interesting, though, is that no one ever talks about the best way or the only way to do either of these. No one really wants to discuss the different ideologies that teach and preach how to reach those goals. Making the world a better place, how to become a better human being. For instance, Islam teaches the way to bring peace upon the earth and make the world a better place is to militarily conquer it and eradicate any belief or religion that doesn't submit to Islamic law. Human secularism, on the other hand, teaches that the way to make the world a better place is by becoming a morally relativistic society. Feminists teach that masculinity, is a patriarchy that rules the world and culture, and so it must be torn down. And when women ascend to their natural power, the world will be a better place. Karl Marx taught that the way to make the world a better place is by forcing human beings to surrender their independence and see themselves as simply a part of the state. Individuality needs to be eradicated, and there can be no hierarchies within society. So becoming a better human being is irrelevant. You're simply to become a part of the machine. Atheists teach that the world will become a better place and that human beings are better when you eradicate all forms of religion and you eradicate all forms of belief in God, because that is the scourge that has caused so much of human suffering and pain. Now, as you see in these videos, ideologies make a huge difference in the way you approach everyday life, the way you deal with your everyday problems. And they're dramatically different. So who's right? Well, Jesus taught that the way you become a better human is by joining his kingdom, which is a spiritual kingdom. And it's his kingdom that ends up making the world a better place. Can we prove that? Well, I think we can. The best way to do that is to ask a simple question. Why does the philosophy of Jesus have the greatest impact on making individual people better and then the world better? Well, John tells us very clearly when he quotes Jesus in the third chapter of his gospel. And Jesus, remember, we talked about this on Tuesday, was meeting with Nicodemus, a Pharisee, and he basically said to Nicodemus, you must be born again. You can't just be born of the flesh. You also have to be born again spiritually. Okay? Now, what are the implications of that statement? Now, most people look at it purely from the standpoint of their personal desires and wants. They say, wow, my life isn't going well. I need to be saved. I need to have another chance. But what they don't understand is that Jesus isn't saying, this is a call for you personally to be born again. He says that people must be born again. And when you read the rest of the chapter, remember what he says. He says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. God so loved the world, he sent his only begotten Son. Jesus did not come into the world to judge it, but to set it free. He says, if you believe that Jesus is who he said he was, then you will not be judged. If you don't believe, you've already been judged. So when you read it in context, what you understand is what John is revealing is the path to which we enter into the kingdom of Jesus Christ, being born again, and then how that kingdom makes the world a better place. And so I think what's really interesting about all this is that, it really reveals some things that are very important. Number one, human beings, when left to their own design, tend to settle, adopt a status quo. They don't innovate or grow. They become tribal. They get prejudicial. They're very unjust. They're unmerciful. They're conquering, oppressive human beings. You see this throughout all human history. You see it with the Egyptian Empire. You see it with the Persian Empire, the Assyrian and the Babylonian empires. You see it with the Greek Empire. You see it in the Far East, with the Chinese dynasties and how they came to power and controlled people. You see it with Attila the Hun and his conquering hordes. You see it with the Carthaginian Empire. You see it with the Roman Empire. You saw it with the Ottoman Empire. You see it with the Islamic Caliphate empires. It just goes on and on and on. So what helps human beings become better people and the world a better place? Well, when they live for something bigger than themselves. Now, everybody who talks about life fulfillment and about happiness on a personal level always iterates this principle, whether they believe in God or not, whether they're conservative or liberal. Across the board, everybody agrees. If you want to be happy, if you want to have a meaningful life, then you need to live for something bigger than yourself. What's interesting is that Islam says this is the thing that you need to live for that's bigger than you. Karl Marx says this is what you need to live for that's bigger than you. Atheists teach this is what you should live for that's bigger than you. Feminists teach this is what you should live for outside of yourself. So you get the point, right? Everybody has an answer to this question, but everybody's answer is different. You know this, I know this, we all know this. So, what is the biggest principle that you should live for? That is one of the best questions you'll ever ask yourself. And that's where critical thinking skills come into play. This is where fluff is not enough. And that is to say, I just don't want to live for something bigger than myself that I just make up, or is a Pollyanna pipe dream or some crazy utopia. I'm going to look through history, and I'm going to look at what things did people believe in that were bigger than themselves, and what was the outcome. I mean, this isn't hard to do. You can look back through history and see hardcore proof. And history shows that Islam expanded purely through military conquering and then the eradication of any belief system that challenged it in any way, shape, or form. For instance, North Africa used to be the most Christian region geographically in the world. Today, you can't find a Christian there. You look at historically the whole notion of communism and the ideology of Karl Marx, and what you see is, wow, that did not work out so well. I mean, the body count just got to be too high. You can go back further in history and look at the Roman hierarchical system. And did that work? No, you can go to India and you can look at the caste system and ask yourself, well, how's that working? The real question is, when you look at all the options out there throughout all history, what does really work? What has helped human beings discover better and better forms of governance? What ideology, if I can use that term, or philosophy has helped human beings become better human beings? Well, obviously, it's Christianity, up far beyond everything else. And so where do these people come from? Why is it that they become better people more effectively than any other ideology? Why do they make the world a better place and help human flourishment and human expansion and human innovation? I mean, you have to go back through history and you realize it was Christianity that brought about the scientific revolution. It was Christianity that brought about the political revolutions that brought us democracy and self-governance. It was Christianity that brought the knowledge revolution with the formation of early universities and how knowledge could be passed on from teacher to disciple or teacher to pupil, and then the pupil could rise up, and they had an organizational way to pass on knowledge. Because prior to that, I mean, under Roman and Greek philosophy, knowledge was considered to be a gift from the goddess Veritas, and that knowledge was bestowed by this goddess on individuals. And so there was never any idea or notion or concept of, well, how in the world do we actually take this knowledge, give it to another group, and then allow other people that are not directly involved to build off of it? I mean, that is a phenomenal shift in the whole concept of knowledge and how it's propagated and grown. Prior to that, Socrates was considered to be, given this gift by the goddess, and then he had disciples that he taught. And then one disciple, Plato, rose up and ran with it for a little bit. But then what people would do is, instead of trying to say, well, how do we build on these philosophies or this knowledge or whatever, they would just spend their time doing what? Studying it, right? And so that shift in how to build and increase knowledge was uniquely Christian in its origin. As a matter of fact, if I can be really salty here, this is the primary difference between nations that have been influenced by Christianity and nations that have been influenced by Islam. Islam does not expand knowledge. You hear a lot about this in some universities, and you hear about this in some other people that say, well, the golden age of Islam expanded all this knowledge and all this kind of stuff. That is just a bunch of hooey. That is so historically inaccurate. What actually happened during these periods of expansion is it happened when caliphates were expanding, and what they were doing is they were conquering these other groups, right? And so for the next century after that, they absorbed them, and then they enslaved them, and then their knowledge was added into, and that's how they expanded. But the amount of scholars and philosophers that expanded and built upon the knowledge and wisdom is, it's very limited in Islam. It's so large in Christianity, you can't even count them. It's just tens of hundreds of millions of people throughout the last 1,000 years. So I think when you just boil it all down purely from a pragmatic statement, you just have to say, what has helped people, become better people more effectively than any other ideology out there? Well, it's Christianity. If you look at what has helped these people then make the world a better place across the board, well, there's no better place than Christianity. So I think that is a very important thing. And I want to dig into now how that happens. And it comes from John's statement, or the statement of Jesus that John records in chapter 3, where Jesus says to Nicodemus in his conversation with him, he says, well, if you want to connect to God, or if you want to know who God is, if you want to understand this spiritual kingdom, you must be born again. What exactly does that mean? Now, the thing that we should think about is this, and that is when Jesus said you must be born again, I think we have to consider the implications of what he meant. Now, if you go and you read through the New Testament, what you see over and over and over again is that Jesus Christ came to do what? He came to give his life a ransom for many. He did not come to be served, but he came to serve. He came, it said, in order to be the propitiation for our sins. He was to deliver us from the kingdom of darkness so that we can enter into the kingdom of life. And so the whole notion that you hear over and over and over again in the New Testament is the forgiveness of sins. And so when you are born again, you are set free from your sins, the impact that sin or imperfection had on your life. And in essence, what being born again is discovering a new human nature. Or another way to phrase it, being born again is how you control and influence your human nature. I mean, as we discovered just earlier in this podcast, and we were talking about, is that human beings, when they are left to their own device, their human nature dictates their behavior in a way that's bad for them and bad for the world around them. It may work for a while. It brings control. Maybe it brings some peace. You know, during the greatest expansion of Rome, the Pax Romana, what happened is it was a dictatorship where the Caesar or the emperor was deified, and everybody in Rome was required to worship the Caesar. And basically you had to give offerings, and you had to go to the temple and pray to the emperor. It was crazy. This is one of the reasons why Christianity was so persecuted by the Romans in the first 300 years, because they would not call whatever Caesar or emperor at the time was Lord. They wouldn't say that. They would say only Christ is Lord. And for that, a lot of them died. Now, what's really interesting, though, is that what that Roman behavior shows is that sometimes human nature can come up with a dictatorial system. It's good for them and it's good for some people, but is it really good for all of the society? Because you'd go into the city of Rome during the Pax Romana, the glory of Rome, and half of the people there were slaves. Infanticide was practiced off the chart, and life was cheaper than you could ever imagine. And so the world wasn't becoming a better place under Roman rule. It was good for the Romans and the upper crust, but it wasn't good for anybody else. So what happened is when Jesus said you must be born again, what he's saying is that we must be freed from the flawed nature that we have that causes us to do these things. Now that in of itself, in my opinion, is one of the most brilliant things you could ever imagine. Because basically what he's doing is he's just going right to the core issue of human nature. What he's saying is this. He's saying, look, human nature left to its own design ends up doing this, right? So you need to live for something bigger than yourself to help control and influence your human nature. Well, in Rome, the Stoics came up with an approach because they understood this. But what happened is, Islam came along. They came up with an approach. Atheists came along. Feminists came along. Karl Marx came along. Everybody keeps coming along with ways in which to do this. But none of them work. And you know why? Because none of these earthly systems can set themselves free enough from their tainted nature to know what a pure or righteous nature truly is. You see, what you have to do is you can recognize that your nature is flawed, but how do you know what a good nature is? How do you know what a righteous nature is? Well, Jesus said, I will teach you what righteousness is. I'll make you righteous and then show you what righteousness looks like in the eyes of God, your creator. To me, that's absolutely brilliant. And I think that's one of the primary philosophical influences on the founding fathers of America. Now, just recently I've been trying to read through the Federalist Papers, and that's because I just think it's kind of a duty thing, and I'm kind of curious. And they're all kind of short, but if you're not trained, in reading, or rhetoric, then I'll tell you what, they can be a little laborious to get through, even though they're short. But you know what? The best thing you could ever do is sit down and read a Federalist paper once a week. And they're very short. I mean, it takes you maybe 10 minutes to read one sometimes. And so I was reading, I was on Federalist paper number 6, written by Alexander Hamilton. And it's basically a system to ensure the proper interactions between the states. And so he's saying we have to have a system so that the states don't act like states acted in all of human history. And so it's really interesting how he makes this argument. He basically says, well, first and foremost, what happens is states or nations or empires or whatever always acted in a way that was selfish and narcissistic. So he basically lays out that the reasons so many ancient people went to war and Romans did what they did and stuff was more based on personal offense than ever what was best for their citizenry. Like the story of Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Well, what does that mean? Well, she left her husband, and so and he was a ruler of one nation. And so what happened is he launched 1,000 ships to go to war with Troy to bring her back. And so it was crazy, all because he lost his wife. That wasn't good for anybody. Well, in the same way, he talks about this and he goes, look, one state might get more powerful and then think, oh, I'm just going to take over that state because I want its resources. And we can't depend upon the good graces or the wisdom of whoever's ruling that state to check their human nature to conquer and control. Then the other side, he starts arguing this. He goes, then there's another problem. There's some people who think, well, we could just create a utopia where everybody gets along and there's never any problems. And he goes, this is not realistic. There's always conflict. There's always problems. It's always a mess. There's no way we can come up with a human system that's going to create a utopia. And I just thought this is interesting. This is what our founding fathers wrote in the Federalist Papers. And this is what we're arguing about and voting over in 2024 and 2025. Isn't that amazing? That just blows my mind right there. But he goes on to say, he goes, look, we have to have a system that does, one, it checks the human nature to conquer and destroy, and we have to check the human nature that thinks we can create a system that's a utopia. So we need to have a hardcore, pragmatic system that does both. Now, see, where did that system come from? Where did the knowledge and the wisdom to to come up with the system, the one we use today that works so incredibly and has made America the most powerful nation in the history of the world, as well as the wealthiest in the history of the world. The poorest people in America are in the top 5% of the wealthiest people in the world. It's unbelievable what America has become. And yet, this idea of how to do this came from Christianity. It didn't come from Islam. It didn't come from atheism. It didn't come from communism or socialism, Karl Marx ideology. It didn't come from feminist ideology. It didn't come from a patriarchy ideology. It didn't come from Eastern, Chinese Ming Dynasty or Attila the Hun, or Mongolian philosophy. It didn't come from Confucius. It didn't come from out of India. It came from a simple carpenter by the name of Jesus Christ that lived 2,000 years ago. I just find that absolutely phenomenal, the implication there. Well, I'm going to sign off today as a Salty Pastor. There's a brand new feature I want to tell you about on our website. You can go to our website, and if you just scroll down right below my picture there, you can sign up for our brand new blog that we're going to be sending out. We're going to send our first one out this week, hopefully, and then each ensuing week on Monday, we're going to send that out into your inbox, and so that you can read that. And the whole point of this is that I want to coach in an inspirational, encouraging way. I want you to have a message that comes to you each and every week where you hear the voice of God saying to you, not me, but God saying to you, Jesus saying to you, hey, I'm in your corner. I'm with you. May have challenges this week, but through faith, remember, it's your faith that is the victory that overcomes the world. So I want to remind you and encourage you and inspire you of who you are in Christ. So would you please go there, sign up, and it automatically puts you on the email list. While you're there, if you can, also click on the donate button and become a regular supporter of the Salty Pastor Ministries, because we can't do it without you. God bless.